She didn't ask to be queen, she only asked to be heard. But when the council tried to silence her, when tradition tried to erase her, she didn't raise her voice. She raised her prayers. Born in Chicago, crowned in controversy, Lydia Monroe stepped into a palace not with privilege, but with purpose, and through betrayal, war, and quiet revolution, she never stopped kneeling. This is the story of a faith-filled woman, a nation on the edge, and the God who still places queens in shadows to change history. Let's begin. South Korea, the gates of the Eastern Pearl Royal Palace opened slowly, guarded by silver-plated lion statues that shimmered beneath the soul morning sun. A convoy of black armored sedans crawled up the drive, the royal crest etched in quiet gold on each door. Inside the second car, Lydia Monroe sat stiffly, her hands folded over the edge of her Bible, which she kept closed but not far from her chest. Across from her, nestled in opposite corners of the seat, sat Jamin and Levi, her twin boys, both wide-eyed as they pressed their faces against the window. "Mommy, is that our house now?" Levi whispered. Lydia smiled softly, brushing his curls aside. "It's Daddy's house, but we belong here too." She looked past them, eyes fixed on the towering palace doors ahead, because God placed us here. A few years earlier, Chicago, winter night. Snow fell gently on the rooftop chapel. There were no royal guards, no media, no velvet banners, just a handful of people, and a Bible between two clasped hands. Sun Jae, then merely a crown prince by title and a stranger in Lydia's city, stood in a black suit, his head bowed in reverence. Lydia wore no tiara, only a simple ivory dress and a veil her grandmother had sewn by hand. They had chosen Psalm 127 verse 1 as their vow. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Sun Jae kissed her hand instead of her lips, out of honor, not hesitation. Tears welled in his eyes. "I will protect this house, even if the kingdom doesn't," he had said that night as they prayed on the chapel floor together. Back to present, the sedan stopped. A butler opened Lydia's door as cameras began flashing violently from behind security lines. Royal guards saluted, and an assistant bowed too deeply to make eye contact. "Welcome to the palace, Princess Monroe," he said stiffly. But he said princess like it burned his tongue. Lydia stepped out, her long navy coat billowing slightly in the breeze. Jamin clutched her right hand, Levi her left. Their matching camel coats and red scarves made them look like young royalty. But to the press, they were illegitimate heirs from an illegitimate union. Within seconds, headlines exploded online. "Foreign wife returns. Scandal in the palace resurfaces. Crown Prince's American bride and her questionable twins. Unworthy or unbothered. The woman, refusing to bow." Lydia didn't flinch. She had endured worse in academia, worse in airports, worse even in churches that promised unity, but treated her as a mission field. What they didn't understand, what they never would, was that she wasn't walking into the palace for a title. She was walking in on a calling. Nightfall. The palace was beautiful, but cold. Chandeliers glittered over marble corridors where servants bowed and whispers lingered in the air long after footsteps faded. Royal portraits lined the walls. No faces like hers. No skin like Jamin's or Levi's. But her sons were running through the private family wing, laughing, full of joy that the palace could not poison. She tucked them into bed, smoothing their hair down, fingers brushing over their little foreheads. Levi frowned. "Are we going to stay here forever?" Lydia paused, then sat beside him. "I don't know about forever, baby, but I do know this." She leaned in and touched his heart gently with her palm. You were born with royal blood, but more than that. You were born for a kingdom not made by hands. Jamin blinked. God's kingdom? Exactly, Lydia smiled. And no crown on this earth can change that. She kissed them both good night, then sat in the corner chair for a moment, her Bible on her lap, open to Psalm 91. She closed her eyes. Father, cover this house. Hide us under your wings. Let no threat prosper. But even as she prayed, she sensed something shifting. The next morning, a knock at the private chamber door. Not her maid, not a guard. A man in formal uniform stood at the threshold, expression tight. Her Royal Highness, the council requests your urgent attention. He handed her a sealed envelope, marked with the council's black phoenix insignia. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were 6 lines, cold, clinical, and devastating. Due to the growing instability surrounding the royal union, we advise Crown Prince Sunjae be exiled immediately from the line of succession. Unless His Highness issues an official statement of abdication or renounces the marriage, the council will move to declare him unfit to rule. Lydia stood frozen, the paper crackling slightly in her grip. She looked toward the hallway, where her sons were laughing with their tutor, then back at the letter. So this is the cost, she whispered, not just for marrying him, but for standing for something eternal. Lydia lowers the letter slowly. A fire stirs in her eyes. She picks up her Bible from the table, but doesn't open it. Instead, she walks to her son's room, kneels, and places the letter on the floor beside her. And then she begins to pray out loud, not like a woman in fear, but like a woman preparing for war. 7:42 a.m. Private session of the High Council. The long oval table gleamed under golden ceiling lanterns, polished so sharply the reflections of the councilors distorted beneath them like ghosts. At the head of the room stood Prime Minister Yoon Tae-hwan, posture as rigid as his tone. We warned him, he said coldly, and now our warnings become laws. Around him sat 12 robed men, some aging, some ambitious, all stone-faced. Your Excellency, one elder began cautiously, public sentiment is shifting. The people admire the princess's grace under pressure. They admire her silence, Yoon cut in. That's different from loyalty. And silence, I remind you, is always temporary in foreign hands. A few men looked away. One sighed. Yoon stepped forward, lowering his voice like a blade drawn slow. We cannot allow this marriage to redefine royal purity. We will not let her sons bear the seal of pearl while we still draw breath. He tapped a leather dossier on the table, its edges marked in crimson. If Crown Prince Sunjae refuses to abdicate or annul this misalignment, we will act. The Constitution gives us that right. You mean to declare the heirs illegitimate? Someone asked in disbelief. Yoon didn't flinch. Only by law. Their mother declared them outsiders the day she stepped into this house. Silence settled. Royal Garden Tea Pavilion, 1:06 p.m. Lydia's invitation with the Queen Dowager. The tea pavilion sat under white blossom pear trees, perfectly manicured and stunningly still. The Queen Dowager had chosen it. Neutral territory, yet symbolic. Lydia Monroe, dressed in a soft gray hanbok-style blouse and pencil skirt, approached with deliberate grace. She greeted the Queen with a low, respectful bow, her curls pinned into a loose chignon. The Queen Dowager gestured to the cushion across from her. She did not rise. The tea is native to our soil, she said without looking up, brewed at a precise temperature. Anything less ruins its purity. Lydia sat calmly. Purity doesn't intimidate me, Your Majesty, but I know it's often used to justify things that aren't very holy. A long silence. The queen finally raised her eyes. You come from a culture of democracy. We do not evolve easily, especially not when outsiders insist we must. I didn't come to evolve your kingdom, Lydia replied gently. I came because I love your son, and because God made me his helpmate, not his headline. The Queen Dowager's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes briefly shifted. Love has a short reign in royal halls, she said coolly. Tradition, however, endures. Then perhaps, Lydia said, lifting her teacup, it's time the two stopped being enemies. Neither of them smiled, and neither finished their tea. Private quarters of the Crown Prince, 8:17 p.m. That night, the day had drained the light from the palace windows. Rain tapped gently at the glass as Sanjay stood at his desk, flipping through reports and diplomatic messages. Lydia entered quietly, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Her forehead rested between his shoulder blades. I spoke with your mother, she whispered. He turned slowly and cupped her cheek. I know. She doesn't hate me, Lydia said softly. She just doesn't know where to put me. Sanjay smiled faintly. Then we build a room she can't ignore. They stood like that for a long moment. Then, almost instinctively, Lydia reached for the Bible on the table and knelt down on the plush prayer mat beside their bed. I don't want to guess anymore, she said, eyes closed. Not about council meetings. Not about public threats. Not even about my worth. Sanjay knelt beside her, interlacing his fingers with hers. You don't have to guess, Lydia. Not in this room, and not with God. Then pray with me, she whispered. Their foreheads touched. The room went still. Lord, Lydia breathed, if you're still here, be our strategy. Be our peace, Sanjay added. Be the place we go when this palace turns into war. Later, that night, 11:32 p.m., Palace West Wing. The hallway was silent, lit only by low wall lamps. Lydia had just tucked the boys into bed and was brushing her teeth when she heard it. A whisper, soft rustle. She stepped into the corridor in her robe. On the floor by the door, slid beneath the crack, was a black envelope. No seal, no signature. Just her name, Lydia. Her breath caught. She picked it up, unfolded it slowly with trembling fingers. The message was short, handwritten, sharp. Leave the palace, or your sons will never inherit. Lydia stood frozen, heart pounding. But then her hand slowly lowered. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in clarity. She walked quietly to her prayer bench, pulled her Bible onto her lap, and looked heavenward. They want fear, Father, she whispered, but give me wisdom. Give me fire. Give me faith for a throne I never asked for. The letter dropped to the floor. She picked up a pen and began writing to her sons. The whisper of threat still lingered in the corners of her chamber. Lydia had burned the anonymous letter after copying its contents in the back page of her prayer journal, not as a warning, but as a record, a receipt. She believed in keeping evidence, even against shadows. Private Study, West Wing. 9:12 a.m., 3 days after the warning. Stacks of royal legal documents, some centuries old, surrounded Lydia like battlements. Thin silk gloves protected the parchment. She moved between English translations and original text, highlighting sections of constitutional law and royal inheritance codes. The wording was thick with ambiguity, carefully crafted to give the council power without responsibility. There's always a loophole, she murmured, flipping a page. And God, I need you to show me the one they thought I'd be too dumb to find. Her Bible sat open beside the legal text, Proverbs bookmarked and underlined. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. The Palace Chapel, Hidden Wing. East Corridor, 3:31 p.m. The chapel wasn't on the official floor plan. It wasn't marble and gold like the cathedral hall used for ceremonies. This place was humble, tucked behind the servants' hallway, carved of oak, smelling of oil and old paper, and it was empty. At first, as Lydia knelt in the back row, a quiet shuffling came from the side alcove. A man in plain gray robes swept the floor gently, head bowed, moving like someone who was always listening. When he looked up, Lydia met his eyes for the first time. Old, Korean. But there was something else, something eternal in the calmness of his gaze. "You're her," he said simply. "I am. And yet, you're here." Lydia smiled faintly, rising. "You were expecting someone with more diamonds?" "I was expecting someone with more pride," he replied, voice soft but not timid. "I left that outside," she said. "It didn't match the sanctuary." He looked down at his broom, then leaned it against the wall and gestured toward the front pews. "Come, sit." She did. "I'm Pastor Un," he said. "I once served the Grand Empress. They let me stay because I'm old, quiet, and forgettable." Lydia tilted her head. "You don't seem forgettable to me." He chuckled. Then his voice turned serious. "Your war isn't against men in suits. It's against thrones not made of wood." "You mean principalities," Lydia said. "Yes, and bloodlines, cursed with pride." She exhaled, the weight of it finally touching her chest. "So what am I supposed to do? Preach my way to legitimacy? Pray the laws change?" "No," Pastor Owen said. "You pray the people change. The laws will follow." He looked her in the eye. "You are not just a wife, Your Highness. You are a seed, and seeds don't look powerful until the tree appears." Years ago, South Side Chicago, Lydia's grandmother's living room. Young Lydia sat cross-legged on the rug, wearing oversized glasses and surrounded by books. Her grandmother, Nana Grace, ironed clothes in the next room, humming an old hymn. "Nana," Lydia called, "I read this story about Queen Esther. She went before the king and saved her people. You think that stuff still happens?" Her grandmother paused mid-stroke, then came and sat down beside her, the iron still humming behind them. "Listen to me, baby," she said, cupping Lydia's face. "Don't marry a crown unless you're ready to carry a cross." Lydia frowned. "I thought crowns were the prize. Not in God's kingdom. In God's kingdom, the crown just tells the enemy who to attack first." Back to the present, the royal kitchen. 6:45 p.m. The kitchen bustled with clanging pans and chatter. Lydia didn't enter like a guest. She entered like a sister. The cooks froze when she walked in, unsure whether to bow or run. But Lydia simply smiled. "I came to peel potatoes and pray." Some giggled. One older woman, her hands flour-dusted, stepped forward cautiously. "Princess, this is not a place for prayer." "That's exactly why I'm here," Lydia said. Within an hour, 7 women stood in a loose circle, wiping hands and nervously bowing heads. Lydia stood in the middle, Bible in hand. "I don't need you to pray fancy," she said. "Just honest." She looked at them one by one. "If this palace is going to change, it won't happen because a crown got passed. It'll happen because you started praying behind closed doors." "But what do we even pray for?" one asked. Lydia opened to Psalm 27. "Start with this," she said, "and just say, 'God, make us brave.'" Late night, private quarters of Lydia and Sanjay. 11:22 p.m. Sanjay rubbed his eyes at the desk, exhausted. Lydia walked in quietly, handing him a small plate. "Rice cake," she said. "You missed dinner." He smiled tiredly. "You cooked?" "I watched someone cook," she said, "but I prayed over it. So technically, I contributed." He laughed for the first time in days, tugged her down beside him. "You're incredible. You know that?" "I'm tired, Sanjay," she admitted, "but I'm not leaving." "You think I'd let you?" he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers. "This throne isn't real without you." They stayed there for a moment, still, breathing together like they were back in that Chicago chapel. Then the phone rang. Breaking news. 11:46 p.m. Lydia's assistant burst into the room with a pale face and a tablet. "Your Highness, it's gone public." "What has?" "A report claiming you falsified your academic record, that you lied about your doctorate, your teaching position in D.C. Your thesis was allegedly plagiarized." Lydia slowly took the tablet and scrolled through the screen. Her photo, her old university's logo. Headlines screamed across the bottom. "Princess or Pretender?" "New Scandal. Did Lydia Monroe fake her rise to royalty?" "University Under Fire. American Institution Distances Itself from Palace Bride." She lowered the device. "They're trying to bury me alive," she whispered. Sanjay stood. Fury stirred in his eyes, but Lydia lifted a hand. "No. Let them dig. Because I serve a God who knows how to resurrect buried things." Outside the palace, cameras flashed like gunfire. Protesters whispered. Council members smirked in private. And Lydia, standing in the soft lamplight of her study, reopened her Bible, not to find a promise, but to draw her next weapon. Royal Media Hall, morning. The camera lights were already on when Lydia stepped behind the podium. She wore a modest navy dress, no royal sash, no jewels, no heavy makeup, just a thin gold cross at her neck and a black leather Bible in her left hand. The reporters whispered at first. Some laughed, some scoffed. The palace PR advisor had begged her to cancel. "It'll make you look weak," he'd said. But Lydia wasn't here to look strong. She was here to stand. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice clear but calm. "I have no rebuttal today, no counterattacks. I didn't come to defend my reputation." She looked up at the flashing cameras. Her eyes didn't waver. "Because I didn't build it." There was a pause. Then she opened her Bible, slowly, reverently. Psalm 23, verse 5. "He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He anoints my head with oil. My cup overflows." She closed the Bible gently. "The table is ready. I didn't set it, but I will sit at it, whether or not you approve, because I am not appointed by this kingdom. I am anointed by the one above it." The room went still. No tears, no rage, just truth, spoken plainly. And that's why it shook the world. That evening, the Queen Dowager's private gallery. The Queen Dowager stood alone in the upper corridor, watching a replay of the press conference on a muted monitor. She didn't sit. She didn't sip her tea. She didn't blink. Her hand hovered above a small photo frame on the table. A portrait of the Grand Empress holding a baby Sanjay. The caption read, "A queen without fear shapes a prince without chains." The Queen Dowager's throat tightened. Her fingers curled around her teacup. She said nothing, but inside, something began to shift. Private quarters. Later that night. The lights were dim. The twins had finished their story time. But Jamin crawled out of bed and tiptoed into the prayer room. He found his mother there, kneeling, Bible in her lap, eyes closed but breathing slowly. "Mommy?" Lydia opened her eyes. "What's wrong, baby? Are they going to take Daddy away?" She inhaled gently, cupped his cheek. "Not if heaven says no. But what if they don't listen to heaven?" She pulled him into her lap. "They will, Jamin. Because heaven's already listening to you." Later, that night, Lydia's dream. The world around her was soft white. Endless. Lydia stood barefoot in an open field, no palace in sight. The sky above was overcast but glowing, like the moment before sunrise. Then, pearls, thousands of them. They weren't scattered. They were growing, like fruit on vines, like seeds from the soil, like snowflakes made of truth. She walked forward, stunned. In the center of the field stood Jamin and Levi, wearing all white, no crowns on their heads, but gold sashes across their shoulders. They were holding hands, smiling, not at her, but at something behind her. A voice, neither male nor female, but layered like wind and water, echoed through the air. Crown them with grace. Lydia turned toward the voice, but everything faded to white. Early morning. Her room. Lydia sat bolt upright in bed, breath sharp, hand clutched to her chest. Sunjay stirred beside her. Lydia? I saw the boys, dressed in white. They were glowing. There were pearls everywhere. He blinked sleepily. What did it mean? Lydia slid her feet to the floor and whispered, I think God's telling me, this fight isn't about me. It's about their future. Later, that day, palace courier arrival. A knock at the door. Lydia answered in her robe. The courier bowed and handed her a small envelope. No insignia, no formal signature. Only one handwritten line across the flap. You and I should have tea. Prime Minister Yoon. She stared at it, unblinking. Lydia turns the envelope over. A time and location are scribbled beneath. Private courtyard. No cameras. No guards. No witnesses. She closes the door slowly, sets the note on the table, and exhales. Then whispers, Lord, if this is a trap, I still trust you. But if this is a battlefield, anoint me again. Royal Garden Courtyard, mid-morning. The sky was a little too bright for a private meeting, too still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Lydia Monroe stepped onto the gravel path, her black heels crunching softly beneath her. She wore a structured cream dress and a silk scarf wrapped modestly around her curls. Elegant, dignified, unreadable. Prime Minister Yoon Tae-hwan waited alone at the wrought iron tea table, one hand resting on his cane, the other stirring a cup of chrysanthemum tea with slow precision. Princess Monroe, he said, not rising. Lydia didn't bow. Prime Minister, he motioned to the empty chair across from him. Let's not waste each other's time with pleasantries. Sit. She did, carefully, not intimidated, but calculated. The tea was already poured. She didn't touch it. Yoon's eyes narrowed. You were raised in America, yes? I imagine it taught you that power comes from sound, from protest, from volume. No, Lydia replied calmly. I was raised in faith. That taught me that power comes from silence, if it's the kind that listens for God. Yoon chuckled, dryly. You do realize your kind doesn't last long in royal halls. Lydia met his gaze, unblinking. My kind? She repeated, her voice almost amused. You mean believers? She leaned forward slightly. We don't last. We outlast. Yoon tilted his head, almost impressed. Bold, for a guest. I'm not a guest, Lydia said. I'm a wife, a mother, a queen by covenant, whether this palace accepts it or not. You've mistaken sentiment for strategy, and you've mistaken tradition for truth, she countered. They're not the same. Flashback, Lydia's baptism. Years ago, South Side Church of Christ. Spring afternoon. The church had been packed with family and neighbors. Lydia, then 19, stood in a simple white dress, barefoot, no veil, No choir. Just the word and water. She clutched her Bible to her chest as Pastor Reuben asked, "Lydia Monroe, do you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and have you surrendered your life to him?" She nodded, tears already forming. "Yes, with my whole life." Then she stepped into the water. Her grandmother whispered from the front row, "This is the real crown, baby. Don't forget that." Back to present, the courtyard. Yoon tapped his cane twice. "You think your prayers and quotes will shield you from history?" "No," Lydia said, "but they'll outlive your plans." She stood, not in protest, but because the meeting was over. "I didn't come here to make peace with the serpent. I came to step on its head." Yoon smirked. "Be careful where you step, Your Highness. Some of these paths are slippery." "Then I'll walk them barefoot," she said, turning away. Private Security Wing. Later. That day, Sunjay stood in front of a digital wall of footage, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He scrolled backward through the surveillance logs of Lydia's room. Something wasn't right. "That courier," he muttered. "He's not in the palace database." An advisor entered. "Your Highness, I just spoke with Commander Du. One of the guard rotations was falsified last week." Sunjay's jaw tightened. "There's a mole." The Grand Empress's study. Late evening. Lydia wandered into the old wing, needing a place to think. The Queen Dowager had forbidden servants from removing anything in the Grand Empress's study. It was sealed like a relic, dust-covered but intact. Lydia moved slowly through the room, fingers grazing bookshelves and glass cases. She paused by an old rosewood vanity. A faded handkerchief lay beneath a cracked mirror. She lifted it. The wood underneath was slightly uneven. She pressed gently. Click. A hidden panel popped open beneath the mirror. Inside was a bundle of age stationery, tied with deep crimson silk. At the top, one letter rested above the rest, written in elegant, slanted Hangul. Lydia opened it slowly. To the woman who walks the palace as both storm and stillness. If you're reading this, then you too have entered without permission, but by divine placement. Let them call you foreign. Let them call you unworthy. The throne is just a chair, but a mother's voice echoes through kingdoms. Use yours. Lydia's hands trembled. Later that night, the wind howled faintly outside the window. Lydia sat alone, processing everything. She opened her prayer journal to write down the letter's message. Her hands brushed the back pocket, and something shifted inside. She frowned. Tucked in the fold was a small, hard object, one she hadn't placed there. She reached in and gasped. It was a ring, antique, ornate, pearl set, engraved in old royal script. The Grand Empress's ring. The one missing for decades. How had it gotten there? Why now? She looked up toward the ceiling, almost dizzy. "God, you're not just watching," she whispered. "You're orchestrating." The chapel. Dawn. The palace halls still hummed with scandal, whispers about forged credentials and missing rings. But Lydia had disappeared from sight. No cameras, no meetings, no dinners. She was in the chapel, day after day. No makeup, no entourage, no statements. Just her Bible, a clay pitcher of water, and her knees pressed against the cool stone floor. Her body grew lighter, but her prayers heavier. "Lord," she whispered through dry lips, "if I eat nothing, let me still feed this house with your word. If I say nothing, let heaven's voice be heard. If I stand nowhere else, let me stand in the gap." The Queen Dowager's entrance. It was the fourth morning when she came. The doors creaked open, and Lydia looked up to find the Queen Dowager standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the stained glass glow. Lydia expected another rebuke, more warnings about appearances, about dignity. Instead, The Queen Dowager surprised her. She stepped inside slowly. Her robes whispered against the marble. She paused at the front pew, her eyes scanning the simple wooden cross above the altar. Then, without a word, she lowered herself beside Lydia. For the first time, on her knees, the silence felt holy. Finally, the Queen Dowager spoke. Her voice cracked. I had dreams too once, before the palace taught me fear. Lydia's throat tightened. She reached out and gently touched the Queen's hand. Then maybe it's time, Lydia said softly. We dream again. By evening, Lydia moved quietly through the palace kitchens, the laundries, the back corridors. She gathered women, not just maids and cooks, but seamstresses, gardeners, even a young archivist. At first, they stood nervously, afraid of being seen, but Lydia only smiled, Bible in hand. We don't need an army. We need a circle, one that heaven can hear, even if the palace doesn't. They bowed their heads, and thus began the Pearl Circle, a prayer chain whispered in kitchens, sung in laundry halls, written on scraps of parchment hidden in pockets. It was invisible to the council, but powerful in heaven. Lydia at university. Years earlier, a 20-year-old Lydia stood on the front steps of her university in Chicago, megaphone in hand. The administration had denied tenure to a Black professor known for his brilliance. Lydia organized hundreds of students, chanting until the board was forced to hear them. A police officer threatened arrest. Lydia hadn't flinched. You can silence me, she had shouted, but you can't silence the truth. That same fire now burned in the palace. Private quarters. Midnight. Sunjay entered their chambers quietly, exhausted. Lydia was at her prayer bench, thinner, pale, but radiant in candlelight. He knelt behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You'll break yourself like this, he murmured. She leaned back into him, tears in her eyes. Better to break before God than before them. He kissed the side of her head, lingering there. Then let me break with you. 2 days later, alarms blared through the palace. Guards rushed into formation, radios crackling. A breach. The IT system was hacked. Sensitive documents, security codes, financials, leaked online. Within hours, palace officials released a shocking statement. The breach was traced back to the princess's private server. The council pounced. The media howled. By nightfall, uniformed guards stormed the West Wing. Lydia stood calmly in the center of her chamber as soldiers entered. Your Highness, one officer said, avoiding her gaze. We have orders to bring you in for questioning. On what charge? Sunjay demanded, stepping forward. Security compromise. The twins cried as guards gently but firmly pulled them from their parents' sides. Mommy, Jamin screamed. We'll be okay, Lydia whispered, voice steady though her heart burned. Don't be afraid. Remember Psalm 91. The soldiers took her Bible. Her wrists were bound. Sunjay fought, but the council's decree overruled him. And as the door slammed shut, the Queen Dowager stood frozen in the hall, watching the woman she once dismissed walk away in chains. Palace Detention Wing, afternoon. The interrogation room was sterile, almost cruel in its simplicity. White walls. Steel table bolted to the floor. No windows. Lydia sat with her wrist unbound now, but her Bible, her constant companion, was gone. The emptiness in her hands ached louder than the questions being thrown at her. The council investigator paced slowly. You refuse to admit the breach came from your devices. Then tell me, what were you hiding? Nothing. You expect us to believe that? A woman with foreign ties, encrypted accounts, and suspicious educational records? Lydia's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. You asked what I was hiding. She leaned forward, eyes steady. I'll tell you. I hide prayers in the walls of this palace. I hide hope in my son's laughter. I hide faith where you can't touch it. The interrogator scoffed. Faith doesn't keep thrones upright. No, Lydia said softly, but it keeps them accountable. The man slammed the file shut. We'll see how long your faith lasts without your crutch. He gestured to the confiscated Bible outside the room. Solitary cell. Evening. Hours bled into silence. The stone walls pressed in on her. No voices. No footsteps. Just her heartbeat echoing against the dark. She sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees. Her lips trembled. God, she whispered, voice breaking. I didn't ask to be queen. I only asked to be heard. But if silence is my battle plan, then let your whisper be louder than their war. Her tears slid silently down her cheeks, soaking into her robe. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall and waited. Not for the council, not for freedom, but for him. The cell door creaked. Lydia looked up, blinking through swollen eyes. It wasn't a guard. It was Pastor Un. He said nothing, only walked in slowly, carrying a folded cloth. He placed it gently beside her. Then he knelt, lowered his head, and slipped out as quietly as he'd come. Lydia unfolded the cloth. Inside, her Bible. And it was already open. Her eyes fell on the first verse. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is from me, says the Lord. Isaiah 54, verse 17. Her chest heaved. She pressed the pages to her lips. Lord, you remembered me. That same evening, the Queen Dowager stood at a podium for the first time in years. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. She held no notes, no prepared script. Her voice, though weary, carried the weight of iron and sorrow. For too long, this palace has hidden behind tradition. I have been guilty of it myself. A hush swept through the room. But today, I will not hide. If Lydia Monroe is forced to leave, I leave with her. Reporters erupted in gasps. Flashes turned the hall into starlight. The Queen Dowager's chin lifted, her gaze unyielding. You call her foreign. I call her faithful. You call her unworthy. I call her daughter. And I will not bury another woman of faith to keep men comfortable. At midnight, the cell door opened again. Guards entered, unspeaking, and gestured for Lydia to rise. She stepped out, Bible clutched tightly to her chest. The corridor seemed longer than before. Every glance from the guards felt different. Some ashamed, some fearful. At the exit, Sunjay was waiting. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. When he saw her, he rushed forward and wrapped her in his arms, not caring who saw. Lydia, he breathed, voice cracking. I thought. I know, she whispered against his shoulder, but God kept me. He pulled back just enough to kiss her forehead, lingering there like a man afraid to let go. The next morning, the council convened again, faces pale and grim after the Queen Dowager's public declaration. Prime Minister Yoon slammed his fist on the table. If we cannot remove the woman, then we remove the heirs. The throne cannot pass to children of diluted bloodlines. A scroll of constitutional precedent was unfurled across the table. Amendment proposal: to strike Jae-min and Levi Monroe from the royal line of succession. The war room, Lydia's study. Morning. The palace was still divided. Half the nation praised Lydia as the people's queen. The other half demanded her exile. But Lydia had already made her decision. She would not wait for the storm to pass. She would build in the rain. Her study table was cluttered, not with cosmetics or trinkets, but with stacks of handwritten notes, Bibles, and translations of foreign policy briefs. A world map hung across the wall, dotted with pins marking embassies she intended to reach. Every meeting she scheduled came with a fast, every handshake preceded by prayer. Her assistant once whispered nervously, "Your Highness, they think you're lobbying." Lydia smiled faintly. "I'm not lobbying. I'm interceding. The strategy is prayer. The politics are just the packaging." The ambassadors' meetings. Afternoon. One by one, foreign envoys arrived. Quiet, unofficial. Lydia spoke with them in back rooms, never flinching when they questioned her legitimacy. "Professor Monroe, forgive my bluntness," said the French ambassador, "but why should we support your cause when even your own council rejects you?" Lydia met his gaze with steady calm. "Because I'm not asking you to support me. I'm asking you to support justice, and justice doesn't need citizenship papers." The ambassador hesitated, then nodded. "Later," the Nigerian envoy whispered as they parted, "you remind me of Queen Esther. They won't know what hit them until it's too late." The Queen Dowager stood in the dim, echoing hall where the portraits of past queens stretched floor to ceiling. Stern faces, painted jewels, eyes that stared forward into eternity. But none of them looked like Lydia. The Dowager's hand lingered over the most recent frame, her own likeness staring back at her. Beautiful, yes, but tired, carved hollow by duty. She turned to the servants quietly. "Clear the far wall," she ordered. They blinked. "Your Majesty?" "For a new portrait." Their silence was answer enough, but she pressed further. "Prepare it for the Queen who prays." Sanjay sat alone in his private chamber, the weight of betrayal and the council's threats pressing heavier than his crown. Dust covered the leather-bound journal he hadn't touched in weeks. Tonight, he opened it. The ink bled slightly as he wrote, hand trembling, "God of my wife, if you still listen, don't save my crown. Save my family." His tears fell onto the page. He closed the journal and pressed it to his chest, whispering, "She believes in you. Maybe I can too." 2 nights later, it was meant to be routine, a banquet with the foreign dignitaries, a show of unity. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold light across polished marble. The council smiled too much, their teeth gleaming sharper than the silverware. Lydia wore a modest gown of deep emerald. Sanjay, a crisp royal suit. Together they looked untouchable, but Lydia felt it, an unease in her spirit, a heaviness that no orchestra could drown. She whispered at the table, brushing his hand, "Something's not right." He squeezed her fingers gently under the table. "You're just tired. It'll pass." But it didn't. The toast came. The council raised their glasses. Dignitaries followed. Sanjay lifted his cup, lips barely touching the rim. Moments later, his hand slipped. His body jolted. The glass shattered on the marble. "Your Highness!" Gasps rang out as Sanjay collapsed against the table, convulsing, his face pale. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed in. Servants screamed. Lydia fell to her knees beside him, cradling his head. "Sanjay, stay with me, please." His lips moved faintly, whispering, "Tell the boys. I love them." Then his eyes rolled back. Royal Medical Wing, afternoon. The room stank of antiseptic and fear. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms, wires and tubes wrapping around Sanjay like chains. His chest rose and fell shallowly beneath the thin hospital sheets. Lydia sat at his bedside, her hand clasping his limp fingers. Her emerald gown from the banquet was still stained at the hem. Her makeup had smudged into nothing. Doctors whispered in the corner, Council members waited in the hall. Prime Minister Yoon's voice cut through like a knife when he entered. "Princess Monroe," he said coldly, "the prognosis is grim. Crown Prince Sunjae may not recover." Her head snapped up. "Don't you dare speak that over him." "Reality doesn't ask permission," Yoon replied. "The kingdom can't remain leaderless. The council proposes a regency. His cousin, Lord Ji-woon, has been prepared for this moment." Lydia's chest tightened. "No," she whispered. Yoon's eyes narrowed. "Then widowhood or exile. Choose." Hours later, Lydia stumbled into the chapel. Alone. No cosmetics. No crown. No attendants. Her hair was frizzed from tears, and her eyes swollen. She collapsed at the front, her forehead pressed against the wooden steps before the cross. The silence screamed louder than words. Then the chapel doors creaked. The Queen Dowager entered quietly. She didn't carry her regal aura tonight, just an old woman, weary and haunted. She stopped a few feet away, watching Lydia's body tremble. Lydia lifted her head, face streaked with tears. "You told me to bend," she sobbed, "but now I'm broken." Her hands fisted against her chest. "All I have left is God." For the first time, the Queen Dowager knelt, not as monarch, not as mother, but as woman beside woman. She whispered, voice trembling, "Then maybe that's all you need." Private quarters, midnight. The palace was quiet, except for the chaos brewing outside. Protesters chanted, rumors spread, foreign journalists circled like vultures. In her chamber, Lydia stood before the mirror, pulling her hair into a low bun. She wore the same navy dress from her first press conference, this time draped with the Sunjae's royal sash across her shoulders. Her son slept in the next room, unaware of the storm waiting outside their door. She opened her Bible one last time. Her eyes fell on Psalm 46. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear." She closed it, took a breath, walked out. The live stream, 12:04 a.m. The palace broadcast studio flickered with lights. The technician looked nervous. "Are you certain, Princess?" "I'm not here to be certain," Lydia said. "I'm here to be faithful." "Start the feed." The red light blinked on. Millions watched from screens across the kingdom. Lydia stood tall, Bible in her hand. Her voice cut through the midnight silence like a trumpet. "This kingdom crowned a man, but I crowned a family." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "You crowned him. I crowned our family, and I will not let either fall." The screen froze for a moment as networks rushed to rebroadcast it. Her final words lingered. "If the council wants war, then let them know this. I fight on my knees, and that is the strongest place to stand." Outside the palace, moments later, the chant began small, then grew. Crowds of ordinary citizens gathered at the gates, holding candles, signs, and crosses. Some shouted, others wept. Many prayed aloud. The cry rose like thunder across the city. "Long live the crown princess! Protect the family! No to exile!" Within hours, the gates were flooded, not with soldiers, with the people. The Royal Medical Wing, dawn. The room was still dim, machines humming softly. Lydia had barely slept. She sat curled in a chair beside Sunjae's bed, watching the slow rhythm of his breath. When her gaze drifted, she noticed a worn leather book at the edge of the bedside table, half hidden beneath folded linens. Her fingers reached for it. Sunjae's journal. She hesitated before opening it, almost as if intruding on a sacred thing. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and ink. At first, She found lists of meetings, court politics, and financial notes. But as she turned further, the words changed. Scriptures, scribbled prayers, and then letters to her. Lydia, you teach me that crowns mean nothing if my family crumbles. I used to believe I would save the nation. Now I believe you were sent to save me. Her tears fell freely onto the page. She pressed her lips to his handwriting, whispering, "And I will never stop, Sanjay. Not until you rise again." The chapel, later that day. Pastor Un entered quietly, his gray robes brushing against the stone floor. In his hand, an unmarked envelope. "It was risky to get this to you," he said, sliding it across the table, "but the truth has a way of surviving." Lydia opened it. Inside was a flash drive and printed stills from surveillance footage. Her blood ran cold as she studied them. Prime Minister Yoon in the banquet kitchen, whispering with the staffer who switched the wine bottles. There it was. Proof. Lydia exhaled shakily. So it wasn't chance. It was assassination. Pastor Un nodded, and the serpent has finally shown his fangs. The Queen Dowager's Private Council. Evening. For the first time in decades, the Queen Dowager convened her own session in her chambers. No cameras, no advisors outside the trusted circle, only 5 key elders, handpicked from the council's fractured ranks. The Queen Dowager stood straighter than she had in years, her voice unwavering. You doubt her because of her birthplace, but I tell you, Lydia Monroe has fulfilled the duties of a queen in everything but title. She guards the heirs. She prays for the kingdom. She commands respect without demanding it. Let her rise. One elder dared to protest. Your Majesty, she was not... The Dowager's hand struck the table. Enough. We will not bury another faithful woman in this house. Her eyes glistened. For the first time, she said aloud what her heart had decided. She is the queen this nation needs. The Grand Council Chamber, next morning. The chamber was filled with whispers, every elder watching Lydia as she entered in a modest ivory dress, her Bible in hand. She stood alone at the center of the marble floor. Prime Minister Yoon sneered from his seat, still feigning calm. Lydia's voice rose clear, echoing across the domed ceiling. I may not be born of this land, but I have bled for it. She lifted the evidence packet Pastor Yoon had given her, dropping it onto the council table. While you tried to strip me of dignity, I was fighting for this palace's soul. And while you poisoned my husband, I was praying for his breath. The silence was thunderous. If that does not make me worthy of this throne, then tell me, what does? Gasps filled the chamber as guards entered, seizing Prime Minister Yoon. He struggled, shouting curses. This kingdom will rot without me. You think she can save you? She'll destroy everything. The elders turned their eyes away. None defended him. Lydia stood unmoved, her gaze fixed on heaven. Just as the council prepared to close, the chamber doors creaked. A young woman strode in. Lady Na Kyung, Yoon's protege. Dressed in crimson silk, her expression calm, her tone sharper than glass. She bowed slightly. Esteemed elders, I rise to fill the vacancy left by my mentor, and I propose a final safeguard for our monarchy. She unrolled a scroll and read, Clause 117. The Queen of the Eastern Pearl must be of royal blood. No exceptions. The chamber erupted in shouts. Some elders nodded grimly. Others looked stunned. Lydia's heart sank, but her jaw set like steel. This wasn't over. Not yet. Lydia's chamber, nightfall. The palace air was thick with smoke from nearby protests. From the window, Lydia could see flickers of candlelight bobbing in the streets beyond the gates. Her sons were asleep, their small breaths steady. their innocence untouched for now. She sat at her desk, head in her hands. Papers scattered around her, each one a demand. Exile petitions, editorials, calls for her removal. She whispered aloud, to no one but God, maybe if I step down, it'll end. Maybe my boys won't suffer for my stubbornness. A knock, then the soft shuffle of sandals. Pastor Un entered, carrying his worn Bible. You fought long, he said gently. Lydia lifted her swollen eyes. Then maybe it's time to stop. He stepped closer, placing the Bible on the desk. Don't make a decision from exhaustion. Wait on the Lord. Even tired faith is still faith. She covered her face with her hands. But how long can tired faith hold a kingdom? As long as it takes, he replied softly, because it's not faith in you. It's faith in God. The garden gates at dawn. Lydia wandered the palace gardens, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She stood at the iron gates, hands resting on the bars, staring out at the people gathering beyond. Footsteps approached. She turned and froze. Sun Jae, pale but alive, dressed simply, his body still weak from poison, yet his eyes burning with resolve. She rushed forward, clutching him, pressing her face against his chest. Tears spilled as she whispered, You shouldn't be walking. He tilted her chin up, his voice hoarse but steady. And you shouldn't be doubting. Her breath caught. I don't need a queen, Lydia. I need you. But if the people want to fight. He brushed a tear from her cheek, his lips close to her ear. Let's give them one, with scripture and ballots. Her laugh broke through her sob, trembling and fierce. She kissed him, softly, reverently, like a vow renewed. Palace Press Hall. Later that day, Lydia appeared before the cameras again, this time flanked by Sun Jae and the Queen Dowager. Her voice was firm. I will not force my crown on this kingdom. If they question my worth, let them decide. Not behind closed doors, not with poisoned wine, but openly. She looked straight into the camera lens. I call for a national referendum. Let the people vote. If I am unworthy, I will step down. If not, I will rise by their voice and by God's will. The Queen Dowager's broadcast, that evening. The nation held its breath when the Queen Dowager appeared live on television. She wore no jewels, only a plain black hanbok, her hair pinned simply. Her words rang with authority the council could no longer suppress. I was once blinded by tradition, but today I see clearly. Lydia Monroe is not of royal blood, but she carries royal spirit. Her hand rested over her heart. She is my daughter, and she is this kingdom's. The screen cut to crowds across cities, clapping, weeping, chanting Lydia's name. On the eve of the vote, the voting booths opened. Lines stretched for miles. Citizens carried signs reading, Faith over fear. Others held banners demanding bloodline only. By nightfall, the polls closed. The count began, but hours passed, no result. Protests surged outside the palace gates, chanting, praying, some shouting in anger, others in desperate hope. Inside, Lydia sat in her chamber, both sons curled in her lap. She held them tight, whispering Psalm 46 under her breath. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Her boys drifted to sleep against her arms, their warmth the only shield against the storm. Lydia lifted her tear-streaked face heavenward, silent now, just waiting. The grand hall, morning of the results. The palace was suffocating in silence. Ministers paced, servants whispered in corners, cameras hummed with anticipation. Lydia stood at the center, flanked by Sanjay and the Queen Dowager. Her sons were kept in the family wing, guarded but safe. The ballot box seals were broken. The results whispered from aide to aide, moving like wildfire until the chief elder cleared his throat and stepped forward. The kingdom held its breath. "Final count," he said, voice quivering. 60.1%. Yes. The chamber erupted. Shouts of joy, cries of protest, reporters scrambling to broadcast. The gates outside thundered as crowds roared, waving candles and banners high into the air. But Lydia did not move. Her hands remained folded around her Bible, her eyes lifted heavenward. When the noise finally quieted enough to hear, her voice carried, not loud, but steady. "This isn't a victory for me." Her gaze swept the room. "This is a declaration. Faith and family still have a place in the throne room." The Queen Dowager closed her eyes, tears escaping silently. Sanjay leaned close, whispering against Lydia's ear. "You were never fighting for a crown, were you?" Lydia turned to him with the faintest smile. "No, I was fighting for a legacy." The coronation, private chapel ceremony. Unlike the pomp of royal tradition, Lydia's crowning was quiet, sacred. Only the family, select elders, and Pastor Yoon present. She wore a simple ivory gown, no jewels. Her curls flowed freely. The Queen Dowager stepped forward, carrying a velvet box. She opened it, revealing the Grand Empress's ring, lost for decades, now returned to its rightful place. She slid it onto Lydia's finger with trembling hands. "You are not just consort," she whispered. "You are covenant." Pastor Ern anointed Lydia's forehead with oil, reciting Psalm 91 over her. Then Sanjay took her hand and kissed it, his voice breaking. "My queen, my answered prayer." Later that evening, Lydia stood in the palace courtyard with her eldest son, Jaemin. The night breeze carried the scent of blossoms. Above them, white petals drifted like snow, falling gently, glowing in the lamplight. Lydia knelt before him, her hands resting on his small shoulders. Tears welled as she realized the dream was here. The field of pearls, the children in white, the voice whispering, "Crown them with grace." She took a breath and spoke softly, her voice steady but full of awe. "This throne is yours one day, Jaemin, but never forget who holds all crowns." He blinked up at her, wide-eyed. "The Almighty God?" She smiled. "Always the Almighty God." She kissed his forehead, sealing the blessing. Weeks later, the nation unveiled a new mural in the palace courtyard. Not a painting of Lydia seated on a throne, not jewels or grandeur. It showed her kneeling in prayer, her sons at her side, Bible open in her hands. Behind her, the brushstrokes formed a soft, luminous cross of light. The crowd bowed their heads. Even critics stood in reverent silence, for in that moment the nation remembered. It wasn't her crown that changed them. It was her faith. Years later, the hall of the Pearl Faith Day Summit glowed with warm light, its high windows spilling sunshine across banners that read, "Faith over fear, grace over thrones." Leaders, students, mothers, and children filled the seats. Some wore traditional hanboks, others Western suits, and many clutched worn Bibles in their hands. The annual gathering had grown into a movement, one Lydia had never dreamed of, yet one God had authored through her obedience. At the podium stood Queen Lydia Monroe's son, older now, her curls streaked with silver, but her presence no less radiant. A hush swept the room as she lifted her Bible. Her voice carried with the authority of someone who had walked through fire and found God faithful on the other side. "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. Isaiah 61, verse 1. Her words trembled in the silence like a song still echoing after the last note. She closed her Bible gently, her hand lingering over its cover, as though over the heartbeat of an old friend. From the front row, a little girl with braids tied in white ribbons raised her hand timidly. She was no older than 8. "Your Majesty," the child asked softly in Korean, "how did you become queen?" The hall grew still. Cameras clicked, breaths held. Even the Queen Dowager, seated a few rows behind, leaned forward. Lydia's lips curved into the kind of smile that held both humility and triumph. She walked down from the podium, crouched to the girl's eye level, and placed the Bible in her tiny hands. Then she answered with the words that had carried her all her life. "I didn't. I just followed the King of Kings." The audience erupted, not with applause first, but with reverent tears. Then came the cheer, rolling through the summit like a wave. In the shadows, Sunjae watched his wife with eyes still full of wonder. He reached for her hand as she returned to the stage, whispering, "Still the same Lydia." She squeezed his hand back, her smile quiet but sure, always his. The end. They tried to remove her. They questioned her blood, her skin, her faith. But in the end, she remained, not because she shouted, not because she fought like them, but because she followed the King of Kings. And for a nation that watched her endure, they witnessed something greater than royalty. They witnessed faith that would not bow. Lydia Monroe didn't win by power. She endured by grace. And now, history remembers her not just as a queen, but as the woman who brought the cross back into the throne room. Thank you for believing in stories that honor Christ and celebrate covenant. And as always, walk boldly, love deeply, reign humbly. See you in the next story.
Grace became my cover, love became my song. From undercover shadows to where we